This was the scene in Raymond Terrace on the first day of the Christmas school holidays last year. Angry residents closed the Pacific Highway for 10 minutes as a protest against plans to widen the road through the town. Today, the state government has decided to heed the call of local residents and has promised a $15 million bypass. From the southern approach, the new road will leave the highway at Masonite Road via a roundabout. It'll travel east of the Macquarie Golf Club and rejoin the existing highway route near Grahamstown Dam. A recent traffic study completed by the RTA shows that a two-lane bypass would have more economic benefit to the town than the planned widening of the highway to 6 lanes. The bypass will save landmark fig trees threatened by the widening, although a full environmental impact study is yet to be completed.
The present estimate of the cost of the bypass is of the order of $14.8 million. The immediate task in hand for the government is to carry out an environmental impact statement and then to proceed with the detailed design of the bypass.
The EIS and detailed design will take 2 years. In the meantime, the existing highway will be improved as an interim measure. The RTA must also buy much of the land needed to build the bypass.
The land has been preserved for many years as zoned in council zoning scheme as arterial road. Only a small amount of the land is in government ownership at this time, but the zoning has protected the corridor.
The 7-kilometre stretch of road would take at least 3 years to build, but although the Minister has promised the road, nobody at the RTA would offer a start date for the project.
Two months ago, Minister for the Environment Tim Moore announced new regulations to reduce the level of sewage that is dumped into Lake Macquarie. They included an order for marinas and yacht clubs to install pump-out facilities within 6 months, and in future holding tanks on all vessels should become a condition of membership. Private boat owners must, under the new regulations, use public pump-out stations, which will be built at several sites on the lake. At a public meeting last night, the boat owners and operators expressed anger at the short time limit. A committee was formed of boat owners, representatives of government organisations and environmental groups. The Mayor of Lake Macquarie, Ivan Welsh, is to ask Mr Moore to defer the 6-month deadline and allow further discussion between the SPCC and the committee before the regulations are enforced. The families have so far spent more than $200,000 searching for the 4 men who disappeared more than a month ago off the Queensland coast on a voyage to Noumea. Yesterday, their private plane spotted what was thought to be a life raft on Chesterfield Reef, about 1,300 kilometres east of Townsville. However, a search of the area this morning by a federal sea safety aircraft revealed the object to be a yellow garbage bin.
It did its passes over the reef, low level, very slowly, took some photos of the object, which has now been identified as a yellow cylinder. It is believed it could be a yellow garbage bin.
The long-range aircraft made a final sweep of the area before returning to Rockhampton. For those involved in the search, the last month has been a frustrating time.
It's very emotional and it's very, very frustrating being out in an aircraft 8 hours, looking at a lot of water. It's an amazing amount of water, and seeing so little, it's a very frustrating time. Yeah.
Tomorrow the families will send 2 aircraft out to search with the vessel Sirois, but with resources dwindling and the chances of finding the men diminishing, the families say that if nothing is found in 5 days, they will give up searching. However, they won't stop believing the 4 men are alive. Jodie McKay for NBN News.
First thing this morning in Budapest, the same old dismissive Nicholas Ridley. No interviews, no cameras, if you please.
No, I'm busy at the moment, I'm not saying it.
Do you stand by the remarks that you made yesterday?
Anything to say? There we are.
Have you got any comment, Mr. Ridley, at all?
No.
But as he moved on to other meetings, things quickly changed. Government sources say Mr. Ridley called the DTI with an apology before Mrs. Thatcher's private secretary called him. But a senior minister made it quite clear in London later that it was Mrs. Thatcher herself who demanded that apology, though she did not and has not so far spoken to Mr. Ridley personally. Mr. Ridley's statement was read out at the end of this morning's cabinet and was immediately seized on by the Foreign Secretary.
Made a very full withdrawal, which you've read, and I'm glad that he's done so. I think that clears the matter up.
Well, not quite. It became clear that when Mrs. Thatcher herself reached the Commons that she'd decided against instant dismissal, that her defence of Mr. Ridley was very strictly limited simply to using his apology. There was no ringing endorsement of her Trade and Industry Secretary, and indeed their differences were all too clear as she answered Mr. Kinnock.
Will the Prime Minister not recognise that what the Right Honourable Gentleman has said is not just deeply offensive to our allies and partners, but deeply damaging to our country's interests, and he must go?
My right honourable friend has expressed his very great regret and unreservedly withdrawn his remarks. They do not represent the government's view or indeed my own.
Though Mrs. Thatcher was fairly calm in the Commons this afternoon, I'm told privately that she is very, very angry indeed. And the betting here at Westminster tonight is that Mr. Ridley will have to go. Michael Brunson, News at 10, Westminster.
It was an evening session. The business was dull. The delegates were tired when Boris Yeltsin stepped forward and dropped a bombshell. In a one-minute speech, he ended 29 years of party membership.
С учетом перехода общества на многопартийность, я не смогу выполнять только решение КПСС.
He'd quit. There was stunned disbelief. Then cries of shame. Mr. Yeltsin walked out, turning his back on the Soviet leader he's so often criticized. Mr. Gorbachev reacted calmly.
Товарищи, он заявил о выходе, и я думаю, ни в какую он первичную организацию не пойдет.
Yeltsin was voted out of the party, and 4.5 minutes after he began, he was gone. 1 hour later, another shock, the party split. The leader of the largest radical faction announced they were leaving.
Я уполномочен заявить о разделении КПСС и намерении сформировать самостоятельную демократическую парламентскую партию.
One hardliner was incensed. Mr. Gorbachev accepted that by the autumn a new party in a different Congress will be challenging his right to rule.
Sirois has been BHP's boss for just over a year, after a lifetime's experience in both mining and management. Today it was a chance for him to tell Newcastle business leaders that their common purpose in rebuilding the quake-hit city was an inspiration the rest of the country should follow. He said unethical behaviour by only a few people had damaged the reputation of the business sector, and positive steps must now be taken to improve that image.
I think the business community has to get out there and tell the public what they are doing, why they are doing it, how they're doing it, and how this is important to the ordinary Australian, the person in the street.
Later, he met many of his own employees at Newcastle's Rod and Bar division during his first tour around the works this year. Tonight, he will speak about the mineral heritage of the Hunter to the Australian Institute of Mining and Metallurgy. Rebecca Skinner, NBN News.
Lavina Watson was thrown from her chair in the waiting room of a Broadmeadow psychiatrist when the earthquake struck. Medical evidence presented to the inquest today shows she suffered a massive brain hemorrhage and died in Royal Newcastle Hospital on December 29. There was a candle for Mrs Watson at the earthquake commemoration service at Christchurch Cathedral, but until now she's not been included in the official death toll. For 6 months, husband Jack and son Peter have struggled for that recognition. Today's court appearance was the culmination of endless letters and pleas to officialdom. Dr James Nichols told the court Mrs Watson had a long history of physical and psychological problems, among them depression, agoraphobia and high blood pressure. He said her medical problems made her more vulnerable to the psychological shock of the earthquake. It would have been a contributing factor to her death, he said. Mrs Watson's death was far removed from the more dramatic scenes at the Workers' Club in Hamilton, but today the coroner ruled that the earthquake probably triggered events which led to increased blood pressure and her subsequently fatal brain hemorrhage. In concluding, he said, I will include Mrs Watson as the 13th victim of the Newcastle earthquake. It was the news the Watson family had hoped for.
I think this will now allow us to put a lot to rest. Not a memory, but certainly the anxieties that went to fight this battle.
Among the final documents tendered today, a message from the chairman of the State Rescue and Emergency Services Board. Major General Brian Howard said the lack of a properly coordinated rescue system undoubtedly contributed to problems during rescue operations. The absence of formal arrangements over the years has led to competition, overlapping capabilities and ill will between the services. He predicted that the newly established State Rescue and Emergency Services Board will rectify these problems with a coordinated system for rescue. The coroner has now heard all the evidence relating to this inquest. Council will deliver their concluding statements tomorrow, with Mr Waller to deliver his findings on Wednesday. Leslie Robinson for NBN News.
Following on its experience with the Chifley Square building and another in Melbourne, Alco has secured the contract to fabricate and erect the steelwork on the 64-level Governor Phillip Tower. It's a big job, including structural decking and fireproof coating all the steel, but one which Alco is confident about, having become market leader in the field. The company found its niche 6 years ago with the Grosvenor Place project.
It was a deliberate move to take our fabrication prowess into the building industry. Since that time, the steel frame building as an alternative to concrete has grown and taken market share, and we've been at the forefront of the fabricators and erectors sharing in that success.
While the Governor Phillip Tower and another contract for a $4 million addition to the Alcan aluminium smelter at Curry are good news for the company, no extra employment there will be generated. It does, however, guarantee the jobs of the 120 on the payroll because of the amount of fabrication involved.
It's quite complex steelwork, and so I guess we're looking at a well over 12 months continuation of the level of activity which we've currently got here, and we are already very busy with the Chifley Square building.
Under the circumstances, that's good news.
Oh, it's very good news, yes. We're very pleased.
I'd say two of them maybe have carried as grey. They are white. They have a pink feet and white. They're Australian natives.
The statement made by counsel for the Fire Brigade, Craig Stewart, referred to a report leaked to the media in February. The report claimed victims in the Workers' Club could have been buried alive because of police mismanagement of the rescue operation. Mr Stewart said the report was an unreliable account of a Fire Brigade debriefing which had taken place only 2 days after the earthquake. He said its purpose had been to isolate problems arising from the emergency operation. Emotions and exuberance of expression were not discouraged in the light of it being a stress release exercise, he said. Today's statement by the Fire Brigade attempted to put to rest claims that the initial failure of police to use a thermal image camera hampered rescue operations. Mr. Stewart said the Fire Brigade had no time for small-minded rivalries. He said the rescue operation was not without criticism, but any discord between the services was more apparent than it was real. But tensions continued with a statement given later in the proceedings by Brigade District Officer Norm Parker. Mr. Parker said police overestimated the risk to rescuers of remaining in the Workers' Club. In his opinion, he said, Fire Brigade activities appeared to be based on different training logic. He said firefighters would never reach the seat of the fire if they adopted the same rescue approach as police. Mr. Archie Vitadello has owned Newcastle auto wreckers on the Pacific Highway for the last 30 years. State member for Charlestown, Richard Face, says he's been receiving complaints about the site in recent years from owners of adjoining properties. Mr. Face says locals consider the yard an eyesore and believes it to be plagued with rats and snakes.
This one, of course, has had a situation where they've continued to store the vehicles on the site, and the vermin and various things such as rats have got into it.
2 years ago, Mr. Vitadello was issued with a list of conditions from Lake Macquarie Council. They pointed to the need for the landscaping and draining of the car yard, as well as the building of internal roads. Acting Mayor Bob Tassisis says nothing has been done by Mr. Vitadello to improve the condition of the site. He says legal complexities have meant the government's hands are tied.
The only thing we can do is go down the same course until the government changes the Local Government Act and issues more powers to councils.
Mr. Face raised the issue in Parliament last March. Minister for Planning and Local Government, David Hay, said the problems encountered concerning this car yard will be looked at as part of a review of the Local Government Act. But Mr. Face says any change in the Act will mean little for this particular case.
The council have certain powers, and even if the Local Government Act was to be amended tomorrow, that isn't going to overcome the problem, and it's a real bucket of worms.
In the development of the Surf Lifesaving Association, the rubber duck stands out as the invention of the 80s, a quick manoeuvrable craft that has given clubs a greater scope in saving lives. And as part of the overall training for the handlers of the IRB, they are now included in carnivals. A new competition gets underway at Catherine Hill Bay tomorrow, the first of a triangular series with the best crews in the state chasing top prize money and trophies. Known as the Aquatech Caltex IRB Grand Prix, competitors will be keen to grab maximum points this Saturday, and with interest already high, close results are expected in the 5 separate disciplines up for grabs. To be held this Saturday and Sunday, the championships will have a definite international flavour. Many of the record number of 43 teams entered will field overseas players. The Maitland club has embarked on an ambitious scholarship program and have 2 young lads playing in their top team for the next 5 months. Kane Matthews has represented his country Zimbabwe at schoolboy and open levels and is in brilliant form at the moment. He's lapping up the experience here in the Hunter.
I'll be taking a lot back with me, I think. A lot that I've learned from the top players over here and some of the top players in New Zealand. I think it'll be something that I'll have for the rest of my life, hopefully.
Tony Schraft has been capped 3 times for the New Zealand under-21 team and has recently ridden for the Kiwis in a successful test against Australia. Tony's benefiting from the amount of competition available here in Australia.
Oh, just a lot bigger.
A lot more top players and a lot more juniors and they're coming through.
Competition on the weekend will be held in A to D grades, juniors and a special new category, L-platers, for those who have just taken up the sport.
It might be a far cry from the Bledisloe Cup, but for these over 35s, it's just as important.
No, the main thing is we get here and meet friends we haven't seen for a year or more. I mean, I don't see these blokes for 2 years, so it's a lot of fun.
A must before every game is a glass of internal warmth, and once the niceties are out of the way, these men mean business. At times, though, the competitive spirit and the zest to win is replaced by a gentlemanly gesture. But at other times that's forgotten and it's every man for himself. It's been many years since these men have played competitive football, so it's understandable that the rules of the game are sometimes forgotten. Although their knowledge and love of the game will never die, some of them feel close to it after the match. So sometimes a rest is called for. Instead of a line-out, this is called a drop-out.
Meanwhile, the Newcastle Knights have slammed the new system as unbalanced. Coach Alan McMahon, who is an outspoken critic of the old North-South system, says the new plan will be outdated before it begins.
What do you think of this new system?
Well, terrific if it was for this year. But they've brought it in this year for next year, and that's where it's wrong.
McMahon takes the example of the South Sydney Rabbitohs.
Well, you're looking at South. You know, South were the minor premiers last year. And this year they're not.
So the high flyers of one season may not carry that form into the next. McMahon says the final round should be arranged midway through the season, not before it. This way officials can get a realistic idea of team performances. Meanwhile, in a selection shock for next weekend's match against Wests, Knights fullback and possible kangaroo tourist Gary Wirth has been dropped to reserve grade. Ashley Gordon has moved to the fullback position and Glenn Frendo comes into the team on the wing. Tough hooker Scott Carter is making his comeback in reserve grade after 10 weeks out with a broken jaw.